The neon sign of Murphy's Diner flickered against the rain-soaked asphalt as Sarah wiped down tables with shaking hands. Through the window, she spotted the black pickup truck circling the parking lot for the third time. Her husband had found her again. Panic seized her chest as the leather-clad biker in the corner booth noticed her terror. Marcus "Tank" Williams wasn't just any Hells Angels member. He was a former military medic who'd seen enough broken souls to recognize one instantly. When Sarah stumbled to his table, tears streaming, begging him to hide her from the monster prowling outside, Tank made a decision that would defy every stereotype about his Brotherhood. He didn't just offer her shelter. He organized the entire motorcycle club to create an underground network protecting abused women across 3 states. What Tank did next wasn't just about saving Sarah. It was about transforming his fellow bikers into unlikely guardian angels. The same men society feared became the protectors society desperately needed. But could a group of outlaws really take on a system that had failed so many women? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tank looked up from his black coffee, studying Sarah's bruised wrist as she gripped the edge of his table. The diner's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the yellowish remnants of a fading black eye that makeup couldn't quite conceal. Outside, the pickup truck had stopped, engine idling like a predator waiting to strike. "Please," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain hammering the windows. "I know you don't know me, but I've seen you here before. I've got nowhere else to go. He'll kill me this time." Tank's weathered hands remained steady around his coffee mug, but his mind was racing. 20 years in the Marines had taught him to assess threats quickly, and 15 years with the Angels had shown that sometimes the real enemy wasn't who society expected. Through the glass, he could make out a figure behind the truck's wheel, a man with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to control. "Sit down," Tank said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Sarah hesitated, glancing nervously at the door. "Behind me, where he can't see you clearly." As Sarah slid into the booth, Tank pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over a contact labeled Reaper. Danny "Reaper" Martinez was the club's president, a man who'd built the Riverside chapter into one of the most respected and feared in the state. But Tank wasn't thinking about the club's reputation right now. He was thinking about the young soldier he'd tried to save in Kandahar, whose broken body had reminded him why he'd become a medic in the first place. "I need a favor," Tank said when Reaper answered. "And it's not club business, it's human business." The pickup truck's door slammed outside. Through the diner's windows, Tank watched a man stride toward the entrance, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the kind of practiced smile that never reached the eyes. Sarah's breath caught as the door chimes announced his arrival. "Sarah, honey," the man called out, his voice carrying false warmth that made Tank's jaw clench. "Time to come home. We've got things to discuss." Tank stood slowly, all 6'4" of him unfolding from the booth like a mountain rising from the earth. His leather vest bore the distinctive patches of the Hells Angels, colors that had opened doors and ended conversations for 2 decades. But tonight, they served a different purpose. "She's with me," Tank said simply, stepping between Sarah and her husband. The man's confident expression faltered as he took in Tank's size, the scars on his knuckles, the way other patrons suddenly found their coffee fascinating. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. That's my wife." "No misunderstanding," Tank replied. "She doesn't want to go with you." The tension in the diner was thick enough to cut. The night shift cook had emerged from the kitchen, a baseball bat casually resting against his shoulder. The elderly waitress by the register had her hand on the phone, ready to dial 911. Even the trucker in the far booth had shifted to face the confrontation. Sarah's husband looked around the room, calculating odds that weren't in his favor. His type was used to operating in shadows, behind closed doors where his authority went unquestioned. Public confrontation with witnesses wasn't part of his playbook. "This isn't over," he said finally, backing toward the door. "You can't watch her forever." Tank smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. "Try me." As the pickup truck roared away into the night, Tank sat back down across from Sarah. Her hands were still shaking, but something had changed in her eyes, a flicker of hope that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," she whispered. Tank nodded, already thinking ahead. One confrontation wouldn't end this. Men like Sarah's husband didn't give up easily, but Tank was done watching from the sidelines. It was time to turn his Brotherhood into something more than society expected. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Maya wiped down the same table for the third time, her hands trembling slightly. The morning rush had been lighter than usual, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the persistent ache along her ribs where Derek's elbow had connected 2 nights ago. She'd gotten good at explaining away the bruises, clumsy in the kitchen, walked into a door, fell down the stairs. The lies came easier now than the truth. The bell above the entrance chimed, and Maya looked up to see him walk in. The biker from yesterday sat at the same corner booth, his leather jacket creaking as he settled into the worn vinyl seat. Jake, she remembered. He'd left his name with a $20 tip on a $12 meal. "Coffee?" she asked, approaching with the pot already in hand. He nodded, studying her face with those sharp grey eyes. "You sleep at all last night?" The question caught her off guard. Most customers stuck to pleasantries about the weather or complaints about their eggs. "I'm fine," she said automatically, pouring the coffee with practiced steadiness despite the way his directness made her pulse quicken. "That's not what I asked." Maya set the pot down harder than intended, coffee sloshing in the cup. "Look, I appreciate your concern, but you don't know me from Adam. And for all you know, I'm just another predator looking for an easy mark." Jake's voice was matter-of-fact, neither offended nor apologetic. "Fair enough. But that doesn't change the fact that you're scared, and whatever's got you scared is getting worse." She wanted to deny it, to retreat behind the safe wall of pretense she'd built over the past 2 years. Instead, she found herself sitting across from him, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "My husband thinks I'm having an affair. With you, actually. Saw me talking to you yesterday and decided that explained why I've been distant lately." She laughed bitterly, as if wanting to avoid getting hit makes me distant. Jake's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. A coiled tension that reminded Maya of a snake preparing to strike. "He hit you because you served me coffee." "He hits me because the sky is blue and the grass is green." The coffee thing was just Tuesday's excuse. The admission hung between them like a confession she'd never meant to make. "What's his name? Why?" The question slipped out sharper than she intended. "Because when I decide to care about something, I like to know what I'm dealing with." Maya stared at him, searching for signs of the false bravado she'd learned to recognize in men who made promises they couldn't keep. Derek had been full of pretty words once too, promises to love and protect her that had curdled into possession and control. But Jake's stillness felt different, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with anyone who might threaten her. Derek Castellanos. He's a supervisor at the shipping company downtown. Everybody thinks he's this great guy, coaches Little League, volunteers at the church. She traced the rim of Jake's coffee cup with her finger. He is, most of the time. That's what makes it so hard to explain. You don't need to explain anything to me. Jake reached across the table and stilled her restless fingers with his own. His hands were scarred and calloused, with faded tattoos snaking up his forearms, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "You need to get out." "Where am I supposed to go?" "He knows where my sister lives, where my mom works. He's made it very clear what happens if I try to leave." Maya pulled her hand away, immediately missing the warmth. "Besides, you don't understand. Derek's smart, careful. He's never left marks where people can see them, never done anything in front of witnesses. Who's going to believe me? I believe you." 3 simple words, but they hit Maya like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had said that to her? When was the last time she'd told anyone enough truth for them to believe or disbelieve? The bell chimed again, and Maya automatically glanced toward the door. Her blood turned to ice water. Derek stood in the entrance, still in his work clothes, his smile bright and artificial as his eyes swept the nearly empty diner and landed on her, sitting across from Jake. "There's my beautiful wife," Derek called out, his voice carrying the false warmth she'd learned to fear more than his anger. "I thought I'd surprise you and take you to lunch." Jake turned in his seat, his movement unhurried but deliberate. "You must be Derek. And you must be the biker my wife's been telling me about." Derek's smile never wavered as he approached their table, but Maya could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was already planning his revenge for this perceived betrayal. She was trapped between them now, and the air in the diner suddenly felt too thin to breathe. The parking lot of Mickey's diner felt different under the harsh fluorescent lights as Sarah's shift ended at midnight. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every sound made her jump. She'd managed to avoid thinking about Marcus for most of the evening, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of taking orders and pouring coffee, but now the fear came rushing back like a tide. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with her car keys. The ancient Honda Civic wheezed to life on the 3rd try, and she sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to summon the courage to drive home. Home. The word felt like a cruel joke now. She'd been driving for 10 minutes when she noticed the headlight in her rearview mirror. At first, she told herself it was just another late-night traveler on the empty roads leading to her neighborhood. But when she turned left onto Maple Street, the light followed. When she took an unnecessary right onto Oak Avenue, it stayed behind her. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the distinctive rumble of Marcus's pickup truck. He was playing with her, following just close enough to let her know he was there, far enough back to maintain plausible deniability if anyone asked. This was his favorite game. Psychological warfare that left no bruises anyone could see. Sarah's mind raced through her limited options. She could drive to the police station, but Marcus had friends on the force. She could go to her sister's house, but that would only put Jenny in danger. She could keep driving until her gas ran out, but that would only delay the inevitable. Then she remembered the rumble of a different engine, the calm certainty in a stranger's voice, the way those dark eyes had looked at her with something she hadn't seen in years, genuine concern. Before she could second-guess herself, Sarah yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, tires squealing as she made an illegal U-turn. Marcus's truck shot past her, caught off guard by the sudden maneuver. In her mirrors, she watched his brake lights flare as he tried to turn around, but the narrow street and his bulky truck worked against him. She had maybe 2 minutes. The rusty anchor sat on the outskirts of town like a fortress of chrome and leather. Even at this hour, a dozen motorcycles gleamed under the bar's neon sign. Sarah had never set foot in a place like this, had crossed the street to avoid passing too close to groups of bikers downtown. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. All the warnings about those people and the dangers they represented. But as Marcus's headlights appeared in the distance, growing larger by the second, those warnings seemed ridiculous compared to the very real terror bearing down on her. Sarah parked haphazardly and ran for the entrance. The bouncer, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks, looked her up and down with surprise. Women didn't usually arrive alone at the anchor, especially not women in diner uniforms who looked like they'd seen a ghost. "Please," she gasped, "I need to find someone." "Jake?" He was at Mickey's diner earlier tonight. Tall, dark hair, leather jacket. The bouncer's expression shifted from suspicion to something approaching concern. "Jake Torino? He's in the back corner booth." Sarah pushed through the crowd, past tables of rough-looking men and women who turned to stare at this obvious outsider in their midst. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of spilled beer, country music battling with the roar of conversation and laughter. She found him exactly where the bouncer had said, sitting with 3 other bikers around a scarred wooden table. Jake looked up as she approached, and she saw recognition flash in his eyes, followed immediately by alertness. "Sarah?" He was on his feet before she reached the table. "What's wrong?" The words tumbled out of her in a desperate rush. "He followed me. My husband, he followed me home from work, and I didn't know where else to go, and you said if I needed help—" "Slow down." Jake's voice was steady, calming. His companions had gone quiet, watching the exchange with interest. "Take a breath. Tell me what happened." Before Sarah could answer, the bar's front door slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows. Marcus stood silhouetted in the doorway, his eyes scanning the crowd with predatory intensity. When his gaze found Sarah, his face twisted into an expression of rage and disbelief. "There you are!" he called out, his voice carrying easily over the suddenly diminished noise level. "Time to come home, Sarah. We need to talk." The entire bar had gone quiet now, dozens of eyes shifting between the scared woman, the angry man in the doorway, and the biker who stood protectively beside her. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Jake stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Sarah and her husband. When he spoke, his voice carried a quiet authority that made everyone in the room pay attention. "I don't think the lady wants to go anywhere with you." The next morning arrived with a deceptive calm that made Sarah question whether the previous night had actually happened. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of the motel room where she'd spent the night, courtesy of Tank's insistence that she couldn't go home. Her ribs ached with each breath, a constant reminder that it had been all too real. She checked her phone for the 100th time. No missed calls from Derek. That was unusual. By now, he would typically be calling with his rehearsed apologies, his promises to change, his manipulation disguised as remorse. The silence felt more ominous than his rage. Tank had given her his number before leaving her at the motel, telling her to call if Derek showed up anywhere near her. The idea of actually using it seemed surreal in the harsh light of day. What had she been thinking, asking a complete stranger, a Hells Angels member no less, for protection? Yet something in his eyes when he'd looked at her bruises had convinced her he meant every word. At the diner, Sarah moved through her morning routine like a ghost. Every time the bell above the door chimed, her heart hammered against her chest. Marge noticed immediately. "You look like hell, honey," the older woman said, studying Sarah's face with practiced concern. "Those bruises are getting worse." Sarah had tried to cover them with makeup, but the purple and yellow marks around her throat were impossible to hide completely. "I'm fine, Marge. Really." "Like hell you are." Marge lowered her voice. "I heard about what happened in the parking lot last night. Half the town's talking about it. Tank Morrison standing up to Derek Hoffman. That's not something people forget around here." The coffee pot trembled in Sarah's hands. "What are they saying?" "Depends who you ask. Some folks think Tank's looking for trouble. Others—" Marge paused, her expression softening. "Others think it's about time someone stood up to that bastard husband of yours." Before Sarah could respond, the bell chimed again. Her blood turned to ice as Derek walked through the door. He looked surprisingly composed, his usual post-violence charm offensive in full effect, clean-shaven, dressed in his best shirt, wearing the smile that had fooled so many people for so long. "Morning, Marge," he said pleasantly, then turned to Sarah. "Honey, we need to talk." The endearment felt like a slap. Sarah gripped the coffee pot tighter, her knuckles white. "I'm working, Derek." "It'll just take a minute." His voice carried that edge she knew too well, the warning that meant compliance wasn't optional. "Maybe we could step outside?" "I don't think that's a good idea." Marge interjected, moving protectively closer to Sarah. Derek's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. "This is between me and my wife, Marge. I'm sure you understand." The diner had gone quiet. Other customers pretended to read their newspapers or study their breakfast plates, but Sarah could feel their attention like a weight. In a town this size, everyone knew everyone's business. They also knew better than to get involved in domestic disputes. "Sarah?" Derek's voice carried a note of impatience now. "Come on, don't make this difficult." She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to bolt for the back exit. But her legs felt like lead, and she knew from experience that running only made things worse later. Derek always collected his debts with interest. 5 minutes, she heard herself say. "Sarah, no," Marge whispered, but Derek was already moving toward the door, expecting her to follow. Outside, Derek's mask slipped immediately. He grabbed her arm with enough force to leave new bruises and pulled her around the side of the building, away from the windows. "You really think you're clever, don't you?" he hissed. "Getting your biker boyfriend to threaten me? He's not my boyfriend. I barely know him. Don't lie to me." Derek's grip tightened. "I saw how he looked at you, how he touched you." "He didn't touch me. He helped me up after you." The slap came fast, snapping her head to the side. "After I what?" "After I what, Sarah?" She tasted blood, felt her lips split. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them back. Crying only encouraged him. "You think some wannabe tough guy scares me?" Derek leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. "You think he's going to be around every time you need saving? This is between us, baby. This is forever." A motorcycle engine rumbled in the distance, growing closer. Derek heard it too, his head snapping up like a predator sensing danger. The sound grew louder, more distinct, until Tank's Harley rounded the corner and pulled into the diner's parking lot. Derek released her arm so quickly she stumbled. "This isn't over," he warned, backing away. "Not even close." Tank was already walking toward them, his expression thunderous as he took in Sarah's bleeding lip and Derek's guilty retreat. The morning's deceptive calm shattered completely, replaced by something far more dangerous. The real test was about to begin. The morning light filtered through the grimy windows of Mel's diner as Sarah mechanically wiped down the same table for the 3rd time. Her hands trembled slightly, and she kept glancing toward the door a few seconds. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, and despite her careful application of concealer, the purple shadow was still visible under the harsh fluorescent lights. She hadn't slept. Every creak of the old apartment building had made her jump, expecting Rick to come bursting through the door. But he hadn't come home, and that worried her almost as much as if he had. When Rick disappeared for a night, he usually came back angrier than when he'd left. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah's heart lurched. But instead of Rick's familiar swagger, she saw the measured stride of the man from yesterday. Marcus. He looked different in the morning light, less intimidating somehow, though no less imposing. His leather jacket was gone, replaced by a simple black t-shirt that revealed intricate tattoos covering his arms. The Hell's Angels insignia was still there on his vest, but his demeanor seemed almost gentle. He slid into the same booth as yesterday, and Sarah approached with coffee already in hand. Her movements were automatic, muscle memory taking over while her mind raced. "You look like hell," Marcus said quietly, his eyes taking in the bruise she'd tried so hard to hide. "I'm fine," she whispered, pouring his coffee with hands that shook just enough to make the liquid ripple. "No, you're not." His voice was matter-of-fact, not unkind. "Did he come home last night?" Sarah glanced around the diner. Old Pete was reading his newspaper in the corner booth, and Mel was clattering around in the kitchen, but no one was paying attention to them. Still, she lowered her voice further. "No. But he will." Marcus studied her face for a long moment. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about helping you. Sarah's breath caught. I shouldn't have. I was upset. I didn't mean to drag you into this. Maybe you did mean to. Maybe some part of you knew exactly what you were doing when you asked me. He took a sip of his coffee, never breaking eye contact. I've been in this town for 3 months, and I've heard things about your husband, about what he does to you. The admission hung between them like a live wire. Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable, as if everyone in the diner could suddenly see through her carefully constructed facade. People talk, she said defensively. Yeah, they do. But they don't do anything about it. Marcus leaned forward slightly. I'm not people. Before Sarah could respond, the diner door slammed open with such force that the bell didn't just chime, it clanged violently. Rick stood in the doorway, his clothes wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes bloodshot. He'd been drinking, but he wasn't drunk anymore. He was in that dangerous middle ground where the alcohol had worn off just enough to leave him mean and clear-headed. Sarah's coffee pot slipped from her nerveless fingers, shattering on the floor in an explosion of glass and hot liquid. The sound seemed to echo through the suddenly silent diner. Rick's gaze swept the room until it landed on Sarah, then shifted to Marcus. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. He'd clearly heard about the biker who'd been frequenting his wife's workplace. Sarah! Rick's voice was deceptively calm as he walked toward her booth. Come here. Sarah didn't move. She couldn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the spot, and her entire body had gone cold, despite the steam rising from the spilled coffee at her feet. Marcus remained perfectly still, but Sarah could sense the change in him. It was like watching a predator prepare to strike. Everything about him became focused, controlled, dangerous. I said, come here. Rick's voice carried more edge now, and his hand moved to his belt in a gesture that Sarah recognized all too well. She's working, Marcus said quietly, not looking at Rick, still focused on Sarah. Rick's attention snapped to the biker. I wasn't talking to you, asshole. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. Old Pete folded his newspaper and quietly made his way toward the door. Even Mel had stopped clattering in the kitchen. Marcus slowly turned to look at Rick for the first time. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost conversational. You're right. You were talking to your wife. The same wife you put those bruises on. Rick's face flushed red. What happens between me and my wife is none of your goddamn business. You made it my business yesterday when she asked me to help her. Marcus stood up, and suddenly the diner felt much smaller. And I said yes. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah realized that everything was about to change. There would be no going back from this moment, no pretending that her quiet desperation could remain hidden any longer. The morning sun cast long shadows across the gravel parking lot as Maya stepped out of her rusted Honda, her hands trembling as she locked the door. 3 days had passed since that night at Rosie's diner, and she hadn't heard a word from Jake. Part of her wondered if she'd imagined the whole thing. The quiet intensity in his eyes, the way he'd said her name like a promise. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, hiding the fresh bruises that had bloomed purple and yellow along her ribs. Rick had been in a particularly foul mood when he'd come home to find her missing from the kitchen, dinner growing cold on the stove. His questions had been relentless, his fists punctuating each demand for answers she couldn't give. The diner's bell chimed as she pushed through the door, and Rosie looked up from behind the counter with concerned eyes. The older woman had known Maya since she was 16, had watched her transform from a bright-eyed high school graduate to the hollow-cheeked woman who now moved through her shifts like a ghost. You're early again, Rosie said softly, noting the careful way Maya hung her purse and avoided sudden movements. Coffee's fresh. Maya nodded gratefully, tying her apron with practiced efficiency. The morning rush would begin soon, and she needed the distraction. She'd become an expert at losing herself in the rhythm of taking orders, pouring coffee, clearing tables, anything to keep her mind from dwelling on the impossible hope that had taken root in her chest. The bell chimed again, and Maya's breath caught in her throat. Jake filled the doorway, his leather jacket unzipped despite the cool morning air. He looked different somehow. Cleaner, she realized. His beard was trimmed, his hair pulled back neatly, and there was something in his posture that spoke of resolve. Their eyes met across the empty diner, and Maya felt the world narrow to that single point of connection. He walked to the same booth where they'd sat 3 nights ago, his movements deliberate and calm. "Morning," he said when she approached with a coffee pot, her hands steadier than they had any right to be. "Morning?" She poured his coffee, noting the manila envelope that sat on the table beside his elbow. "You want some breakfast?" "In a minute." He wrapped his hands around the mug, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "How are you doing, Maya?" The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, nearly undid her. She glanced toward the kitchen where Rosie was busy with prep work, then back to Jake. "I'm managing," she whispered. He nodded slowly, then slid the envelope across the table toward her. "I need you to look at this." Maya's hands shook as she opened the envelope, and her breath left her in a rush. Inside were photographs. Rick's truck parked outside the Riverside Motel. Rick walking into a room with a woman Maya recognized as one of the bank tellers from downtown. The timestamps showed they were taken just yesterday afternoon. "How did you—" "I have friends who know how to be invisible," Jake said quietly. "Keep looking." The next set of documents made her sink into the booth across from him. Financial records, bank statements, evidence of accounts she'd never known existed. Money that Rick had been siphoning away from their joint account, hidden assets that painted a picture of a man preparing to disappear. "He's planning to leave," Maya breathed, the pieces clicking into place. Rick's increasing volatility, his questions about her schedule, the way he'd been watching her with calculating eyes. "He's been getting ready to run." "With every penny you've both saved," Jake confirmed. "Probably leave you with nothing but the bills and a story about how his wife drove him away." Maya stared at the evidence spread before her, feeling something shift inside her chest. The fear was still there, would probably always be there, but it was joined now by something else. Anger. Pure, clean anger at the man who had stolen so much from her already and planned to take even more. "What do I do with this?" she asked. Jake leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "You take control of your own story. File for divorce before he can clean out those accounts. Use the evidence of his affairs. Document everything he's done to you." "He'll kill me," Maya whispered, the words automatic. "Not if he's in jail." Jake's eyes were hard as flint. "Not if he knows that anything that happens to you will bring consequences he can't imagine." The bell chimed again, and Maya quickly gathered the papers back into the envelope as a customer entered. But something had changed in that moment. Something fundamental and irreversible. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was planning. Jake stood to leave, dropping money on the table for coffee he'd barely touched. "Think about it," he said. "But don't think too long. Men like Rick, they don't wait forever to make their move." The police station buzzed with late-night activity as Detective Sarah Chen reviewed the incident reports piling up on her desk. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the bullpen where officers typed up paperwork and processed the evening's arrests. She'd been working the domestic violence unit for 8 years, long enough to recognize patterns that others missed. The call about Marcus Shaw had come in 3 hours ago. Assault with a deadly weapon, they'd said. The victim was stable but hospitalized with severe injuries. What caught Chen's attention wasn't the violence, sadly that was routine, but the identity of the alleged perpetrator. Jake Reaper Morrison wasn't known for random acts of brutality. His record showed bar fights and the occasional drug possession charge, but nothing like this. Chen pulled up Morrison's file on her computer, scrolling through his history with the Hells Angels. Born and raised in Millbrook, lost his father in a factory accident when he was 12. Dropped out of high school to work construction. The typical story of a kid who found family in a motorcycle club when his real one fell apart. But there were gaps in his criminal record that suggested someone who understood consequences, who picked his battles carefully. Her phone rang, interrupting her research. Chen, detective, this is Officer Martinez at Mercy General. The Shaw case. We've got a complication. Chen grabbed her pen. What kind of complication? Marcus Shaw's wife is here. She's been beaten pretty badly, and she's asking to speak with whoever's handling her husband's case. Says she has information about what happened tonight. I'll be right there. The drive to Mercy General took 15 minutes through empty streets. Chen had worked enough domestic cases to know that victims often protected their abusers, even when hospitalized. But something about this situation felt different. The timing was too convenient, the circumstances too strange. She found Amy Shaw in the emergency room, her face a canvas of bruises in various stages of healing. Some were fresh from tonight, but others told the story of months or years of systematic abuse. Amy sat hunched in a plastic chair, wearing clothes that were too large for her thin frame, her hands trembling as she held a cup of coffee. Mrs. Shaw, I'm Detective Chen. I understand you wanted to speak with me about your husband's case. Amy looked up with eyes that held a mixture of fear and something else Chen couldn't quite identify. Relief, maybe, or determination. He didn't attack Marcus because he wanted to, Amy said without preamble. He did it because I asked him to. Chen sat down in the adjacent chair, keeping her voice gentle. Why don't you start from the beginning? The story that emerged over the next hour painted a picture of escalating abuse that had trapped Amy in her own home. Marcus had been careful, she explained, always making sure the worst bruises were hidden beneath clothing. He'd isolated her from friends and family, controlled their finances, and made it clear that any attempt to leave would result in consequences she wouldn't survive. I was at the diner tonight, working my shift, Amy continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. Marcus came in drunk, angrier than I'd ever seen him. He started yelling about dinner not being ready when he got home, about how I was a worthless piece of trash. Then he grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back, right there in front of everyone. Chen made notes, observing how Amy's posture changed as she recounted the events. The shame was there, but underneath it was something that hadn't been present in most domestic violence victims Chen had interviewed. A sense of agency, of having made a choice rather than simply enduring. The biker was sitting at the counter, Amy said. Jake Morrison. I'd seen him in there before, always polite, always tipped well. When Marcus let go of me, I was so desperate, so tired of being afraid all the time. I walked over to Jake and I begged him to help me. What exactly did you say to him? Amy's hands stopped trembling. I told him that if he didn't help me, Marcus was going to kill me tonight. I could see it in my husband's eyes. He was past the point of caring about witnesses or consequences. I asked Jake to protect me and I meant it. Chen leaned forward. And what did Morrison say? He asked me if I was sure, just that, if I was sure. When I said yes, he stood up, walked over to Marcus, and told him to leave me alone. Marcus laughed and took a swing at him. Then what happened? Jake didn't fight him at first. He just defended himself, tried to calm Marcus down. But Marcus grabbed a beer bottle, broke it on the table, and came at Jake with it. That's when Jake fought back. Chen studied Amy's face, looking for signs of deception or coaching. Instead, she saw something she'd rarely encountered in her years working domestic cases, a victim who had found the courage to ask for help, and someone who had answered that call without hesitation. Mrs. Shaw, are you willing to testify to what you've just told me? Amy Shaw straightened her shoulders. Yes, I'm done being afraid. The rumble of motorcycle engines filled the morning air as words spread through the Angels' network like wildfire. Marcus hadn't made any formal calls, but the Brotherhood operated on an understanding deeper than words. When one of their own took a stand, especially against a man like Detective Ray Sullivan, the others felt it in their bones. Sarah peered through the kitchen window of the safe house, watching as 3 more Harleys pulled up to the curb. Her hands trembled as she gripped her coffee mug, the ceramic warm against her palms, but doing nothing to chase away the chill that had settled in her chest since yesterday. "They're here for you," she whispered to Marcus, who was checking the locks on the front door for the 3rd time that morning. "They're here for both of us," he corrected, his voice steady but his eyes reflecting the gravity of what they'd set in motion. "Ray won't come alone when he comes. He can't afford to." The lead bike belonged to Tank Morrison, the chapter president, whose word carried weight throughout the entire region. Behind him rode Diesel and Crow, 2 men whose reputations preceded them into any room. Sarah had heard their names whispered in the diner, usually followed by nervous glances and lowered voices. Tank's boots thundered on the front steps as he approached. Marcus opened the door before he could knock, and the 2 men clasped hands in the way of old friends who'd seen too much together. "Brother," Tank said simply, his weathered face serious. "Heard you kicked a hornet's nest. More like burned it down," Marcus replied, stepping aside to let them in. Sarah retreated to the kitchen doorway, unsure of her place in this gathering of leather and steel. These men existed in a world she'd only glimpsed from the outside, a world where loyalty was currency and respect was earned through actions, not words. Diesel, a man whose arms bore the scars of a dozen fights, nodded toward her with unexpected gentleness. "Ma'am, heard what you've been through. That ain't right, what he did to you." The acknowledgement nearly broke her composure. For so long she'd been invisible, her pain dismissed or ignored by those who should have protected her. But these men, these supposed outlaws, saw her clearly. "Sullivan's got connections," Tank continued, settling his massive frame into the living room chair. "State police, feds, judges. He's been playing both sides for years, and now you've got him cornered. Which makes him desperate," Crow added, his voice like gravel. "Desperate men do stupid things." Through the window, Sarah spotted a familiar sedan creeping down the street. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized the driver, one of Ray's detective friends from the precinct. The car slowed as it passed the house, the occupant clearly noting the motorcycles parked outside. "We've got company," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. The men moved with practiced efficiency. Tank positioned himself by the front window while Diesel took the back. Marcus moved to Sarah's side, his presence both protective and reassuring. "He's testing us," Tank observed, watching the sedan circle the block. "Seeing what kind of heat he's walking into." "Let him look," Marcus said grimly. "Better he knows what he's up against." The sedan made 2 more passes before disappearing around the corner, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning. Ray had never backed down from a fight, especially when his reputation was on the line. The photos Marcus had taken were damaging, but they were also a declaration of war. "There's something else," Tank said, his expression growing darker. "Word is Sullivan's been asking questions about you, Marcus. Digging into old business, trying to find leverage." Sarah felt Marcus tense beside her. She realized how little she actually knew about his past, about the events that had shaped him into the man willing to risk everything for a stranger's plea for help. "What kind of questions?" Marcus asked. "The kind that could put you back inside," Tank replied bluntly. "He's desperate enough to manufacture evidence if he has to." The weight of what she'd asked of him suddenly crashed down on Sarah. In seeking protection, she'd potentially destroyed the life of the one person brave enough to help her. The guilt was overwhelming. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for this to happen. Maybe I should just—" "Don't," Marcus interrupted firmly. "Don't you dare apologize for asking for help, and don't even think about backing down now." Tank stood, his massive presence filling the room. "We stick together. That's how this works. Sullivan wants a war, he's got one, but it won't be fought on his terms." Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, matching the tension that crackled through the small house. Sarah knew that whatever came next would change everything, not just for her and Marcus, but for everyone who chose to stand with them against a man who'd hidden his cruelty behind a badge for far too long. The morning sun cast long shadows across the diner's parking lot as Sarah checked her watch for the third time. Marcus should have been here 20 minutes ago. She wiped down the same table twice, her movements mechanical while her mind raced through possibilities she didn't want to entertain. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up hopefully, but it was just old Mr. Henderson coming in for his usual coffee and Danish. Sarah forced a smile and grabbed the coffee pot, though her hands trembled slightly as she poured. "You all right, dear?" Henderson asked, his weathered face creased with concern. "You look a little pale." "Just tired," she lied, refilling his cup. Long night. That much was true. She'd barely slept, every small sound outside her motel room sending her heart racing. Every car door, every footstep in the hallway, every voice in the parking lot could have been Danny. The restraining order felt like nothing more than a piece of paper when darkness fell. The bell chimed again, and this time it was Marcus. Relief flooded through her so completely that she nearly dropped the coffee pot. He looked tired too, she noticed, dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there yesterday. "Sorry I'm late," he said, sliding into the corner booth they'd claimed as their unofficial meeting spot. "Had to take care of something." Sarah poured his coffee without being asked, her hand steadier now that he was here. "Everything okay?" Marcus studied her face before answering. "That depends. You sleep at all last night?" "Some." Another lie, but she could see he wasn't buying it. "Marcus, I've been thinking. Maybe this is too much. I mean, you've already done so much, and I don't want to—" "Stop." His voice was quiet but firm. "We've been through this. You're not backing out because you're scared. Fear's normal, smart even." Sarah glanced around the diner. The morning crowd was starting to thin out, just a few regulars nursing their coffee and reading newspapers. Normal people living normal lives, not hiding from psychotic ex-husbands or depending on bikers for protection. "I keep thinking about what you said yesterday," she whispered. "About the club, about what they might say about you helping me." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Let me worry about the club, but if it causes problems for you—" "Sarah," he leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "There are already problems. Have been for a while now. This thing with you, it's just brought some things to a head." A chill ran down her spine. "What kind of things?" Before Marcus could answer, the diner door swung open with enough force to rattle the windows. Sarah's blood turned to ice as Danny walked in, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto her. He looked different somehow, calmer, more controlled than she'd seen him in months. Somehow that was more terrifying than his usual rage. "Shit," Marcus muttered, his hand moving instinctively toward his jacket. Danny approached their table with measured steps, ignoring the other customers, who were beginning to sense the tension. He was dressed nicely, clean jeans, a button-down shirt, playing the part of the concerned husband. Sarah knew the performance well. "There you are, honey," Danny said, his voice sickeningly sweet. "I've been looking everywhere for you." "You need to leave," Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Now." Danny's smile never wavered, but his eyes were cold as winter. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Just want to talk to my wife." He glanced at Marcus dismissively. "Privately." Marcus started to stand, but Sarah caught his arm. She could feel the coiled tension in his muscles, like a spring wound too tight. The last thing they needed was a scene that would bring the police and lawyers and questions none of them wanted to answer. "We have nothing to talk about," Sarah said to Danny. I filed the restraining order. You're supposed to stay away from me." "Funny thing about that," Danny said, sliding uninvited into the booth across from them. "Seems there was some confusion at the courthouse. Technical issues with the filing. Happens sometimes." Sarah's heart sank. She'd been counting on that protection, fragile as it was. "But don't worry," Danny continued. "I talked to my lawyer this morning. We're going to get this whole misunderstanding sorted out, like it never happened." The threat was clear enough. Danny had connections, money, influence she couldn't match. He was telling her that her small victory had been erased, that she was right back where she started. Marcus hadn't said a word, but Sarah could feel the danger radiating from him like heat from a furnace. His silence was more ominous than any threat Danny could make. "You should go," Marcus said finally, his voice deadly quiet. Danny's smile widened. "Or what? You'll call your friends?" "Funny thing about that, too." The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Sarah clutched the manila envelope containing her restraining order. 3 days had passed since Marcus confronted Rick, and the silence from her husband felt more ominous than his usual threats. She knew Rick well enough to understand that quiet meant planning, and planning meant danger. Marcus waited by his Harley leather jacket gleaming in the early light. He'd insisted on accompanying her to the courthouse, despite her protests that she could handle it alone. The irony wasn't lost on her, seeking protection from a man most people crossed the street to avoid. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked, nodding toward the legal documents. "Once you file these papers, there's no going back. He'll know you mean business." Sarah's fingers trembled as she touched the bruise hidden beneath her carefully applied makeup. "I can't keep living like this. Last night I dreamed he killed me, and when I woke up, I wasn't sure it was a dream." Marcus studied her face with surprising gentleness. In the past few days, she glimpsed moments of the man beneath the intimidating exterior, someone who understood pain and chose to fight against it rather than inflict it on others. "My old lady used to say, fear was just courage waiting for the right moment," he said quietly. "Looks like you found yours." They climbed the courthouse steps together, an unlikely pair that drew stares and whispered conversations. Sarah felt the weight of judgment from strangers, but for the first time in years, she also felt something else: determination. The clerk's office buzzed with morning activity. Sarah approached the counter, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "I need to file a restraining order." The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, handed her a clipboard of forms. "Take your time, honey. Make sure you include every incident you can remember." As Sarah filled out the paperwork, Marcus positioned himself near the entrance, his presence a silent deterrent to anyone considering causing trouble. She caught him scanning faces, memorizing details, already thinking 3 steps ahead. It struck her that this was how he survived in his world. Constant vigilance, reading people and situations with predatory accuracy. "Mrs. Coleman?" Sarah looked up to find Detective Rodriguez approaching, her expression serious. "I was hoping I'd catch you here. We need to talk." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "Your husband filed a counter-complaint yesterday. He's claiming harassment and intimidation." Rodriguez glanced meaningfully at Marcus. He's painting himself as the victim. The familiar weight of helplessness settled on Sarah's shoulders. Of course, Rick would find a way to twist the situation, to make her the aggressor while he played the wounded party. It was his specialty. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low and controlled. "What kind of complaint?" "He claims you threatened him with violence, damaged his property, and are part of an organized criminal conspiracy to intimidate him." Rodriguez's tone suggested she didn't believe a word of it. "It's obvious manipulation, but it complicates things." Sarah felt her newfound courage wavering. "So, he wins again. He always wins." "No." Marcus's voice cut through her despair with surprising firmness. "He doesn't win. This is exactly what bullies do when their victims fight back. They cry victim themselves. Rodriguez nodded. Marcus is right. I've seen this pattern dozens of times. Rick is desperate, which means you're finally getting to him. But it also means he's more dangerous now. Sarah stared at the half-completed restraining order forms. 3 days ago, asking a Hells Angels member for help had seemed like the most dangerous thing she could imagine. Now she realized the real danger had been living in fear for so long that she'd forgotten what courage felt like. "Detective, what happens if I withdraw the restraining order?" she asked. Both Marcus and Rodriguez spoke simultaneously. "Don't." "Sarah," Rodriguez continued, "the moment you back down, you're back where you started, except now he knows you're capable of fighting back, which makes you a bigger threat in his mind." Marcus crouched beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. "Look at me. You think I've never been scared? You think being tough means never feeling afraid? Fear is information. It tells you when something matters. This matters." His words hit her like a physical force. She looked into his weathered face and saw something she hadn't expected. Respect. Not pity, not condescension, but genuine respect for the battle she was fighting. Sarah picked up her pen and continued filling out the forms. Each word felt like a small act of rebellion, each signature a declaration of independence. When she finished, she walked to the clerk's window with steady steps. "I'd like to file this restraining order," she said, her voice clear and strong. As the clerk processed her paperwork, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. The scared waitress who had approached a stranger in a diner was still there, but she was no longer alone. She had found her courage, and more importantly, she had found her voice. The real fight was just beginning. The courtroom buzzed with an energy that made Sarah's skin crawl. She sat rigidly in the witness chair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Across the room, Marcus lounged in his defendant's chair with the casual arrogance of a man who believed the system would bend to his will, just as everything else in his life always had. "Mrs. Collins," the prosecutor began, her voice gentle but firm, "can you tell the court about the events of March 15th? Sarah's throat felt like sandpaper. She'd rehearsed this moment countless times with the victim advocate, but now, under the harsh fluorescent lights with Marcus's cold stare boring into her, the words seemed to stick. She caught sight of Jake in the gallery behind the prosecutor's table, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos of her nerves. "He came home angry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. The judge leaned forward, asking her to speak up. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Marcus came home around 8 o'clock. He'd been drinking, and he was angry about something at work. What happened next?" The memories flooded back with crystal clarity. The sound of his keys hitting the kitchen counter, the way his footsteps had made her stomach clench with dread, the smell of whiskey on his breath when he cornered her in the hallway. He started yelling about dinner not being ready. Then Sarah's voice caught. She could feel Marcus watching her, probably willing her to break down, to crumble under the pressure just like she always had before. But something had changed in her during these past weeks. The woman who had begged Jake for help in that diner parking lot felt like a stranger now. He grabbed my arm and shoved me against the wall, hard enough that I hit my head on the picture frame behind me. She touched the spot reflexively, though the bruise had long since faded. When I tried to get away, he hit me across the face with the back of his hand. Marcus's defense attorney objected to something about the testimony, but Sarah barely heard the legal back and forth. She was remembering the moment she'd realized she had to leave. Not just the house, but the entire life she'd built around making herself smaller and smaller to avoid his rage. The prosecutor guided her through the timeline methodically. Each incident felt like pulling glass from a wound, painful but necessary. The broken ribs from 2 Christmases ago when she'd burned the turkey. The concussion from last summer when she'd forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning. the countless smaller moments of cruelty that had worn her down like water over stone. "Mrs. Collins, did you ever seek help before the night you encountered Mr. Torino?" "I tried to," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "I called the police twice, but Marcus always convinced them it was just a misunderstanding. He's very charming when he wants to be, very convincing." She looked directly at the jury now instead of down at her hands. "And I was too scared to press charges. He always said he'd make me pay if I ever tried to leave him." When Marcus's attorney cross-examined her, he attacked her credibility with surgical precision. Why had she stayed so long if things were really that bad? Why hadn't she taken photographs of her injuries? Wasn't it convenient that she'd found a notorious biker to play the hero in her little drama? Sarah felt the familiar shame trying to creep in. The voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like Marcus telling her she was making too big a deal of things, that she was weak and pathetic and probably deserved what happened to her. But then she remembered Jake's words from that first night. "You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving." "I stayed because I was afraid," she said simply when the defense attorney pressed her about her motivations. "And because when someone spends years telling you that you're worthless, that no one else would ever want you, that you can't make it on your own, eventually you start to believe them." The attorney's expression remained skeptical. "And yet, you expect this jury to believe that a Hells Angels member simply decided to help you out of the goodness of his heart?" For the first time during her testimony, Sarah felt a flash of real anger. "Jake Torino saved my life. Whatever you think about his motorcycle club or his appearance or his past, he did something for me that no one else was willing to do. He believed me when I said I was in danger, and he acted to protect me. If that's not goodness, I don't know what is." The courtroom fell silent except for the soft whir of the ventilation system. Sarah met Marcus's gaze directly for the first time since entering the room, and what she saw there, fury mixed with something that might have been fear, told her everything she needed to know about how her testimony had landed. She was no longer the terrified woman who had fled into that parking lot months ago. The courthouse steps felt cold beneath Sarah's trembling legs as she sat waiting for Marcus to emerge from his meeting with the district attorney. 3 days had passed since Danny's arrest, and the media circus showed no signs of dying down. News vans lined the street like vultures, their satellite dishes reaching toward a grey October sky that seemed to mirror her mood. She pulled her jacket tighter, watching pedestrians hurry past with their heads down, some stealing glances in her direction. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow-green shadows, but she knew people recognized her from the newspaper photos. The woman who'd brought down Danny Reeves, the waitress who'd asked a Hell's Angel for help. "Sarah?" A gentle voice made her look up. Dr. Amanda Chen, the trauma counselor the prosecutor's office had assigned to her case, approached with 2 steaming coffee cups. "I thought you might need this. Thank you." Sarah accepted the warmth gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the paper cup. "Any word from inside?" Amanda settled beside her, her professional calm a steadying presence. "Marcus should be finishing up soon. The DA's team is very pleased with how the case is developing. Danny's previous victims are coming forward, and the evidence is overwhelming." Sarah nodded, though the knowledge brought little comfort. Each new victim who stepped forward meant another woman who'd suffered in silence, another family torn apart by Danny's violence. "I keep thinking about what Marcus said, that this is bigger than just me and Danny now. He's right. What you've done has created ripples throughout the community. The domestic violence hotline has seen a 300% increase in calls since your story broke. Women are finding courage because of your example." Before Sarah could respond, the courthouse doors opened and Marcus appeared, his leather jacket replaced by a simple black shirt and jeans, his concession to courthouse propriety. Even dressed down, his presence commanded attention. Several reporters immediately surged toward him, but he held up a hand and walked directly to Sarah. "How did it go?" she asked, standing to meet him. Good. Real good. His weathered face showed the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in days. The DA's confident they've got enough to put Danny away for a long time. Your testimony, combined with the other evidence and the new victims coming forward, he's looking at 15 to 20 years. Sarah felt her knees weaken with relief. It's really over? Not quite yet. The trial's still months away, and Danny's lawyer is going to fight hard. But yeah, the worst part's behind us. Dr. Chen gathered her things. I'll let you two talk. Sarah, remember our session tomorrow at 2. As the counselor departed, Marcus guided Sarah away from the courthouse entrance, away from the prying eyes and clicking cameras. They walked in comfortable silence through the small downtown district, past shops where people pressed their faces to windows to stare. This attention, Sarah said finally, it's not going away anytime soon, is it? Marcus shook his head. Probably not. You've become a symbol, whether you wanted to or not. The scared waitress who stood up to her abuser, the unlikely friendship between a victim and a biker. Media loves that kind of story. They paused at a small park, settling on a bench beneath a maple tree shedding its autumn leaves. Sarah watched children playing on the playground, their laughter carrying on the crisp air. Normal life continuing around them while her world remained suspended in legal proceedings and media scrutiny. I've been thinking about what comes after, she said quietly. When the trial's over, when the reporters move on to the next story. What do I do then? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the falling leaves. You live, really live. For the first time in years, you figure out who Sarah is when she's not afraid, when she's not walking on eggshells every day. I don't remember who that person is. Then you get to discover her. That's the gift in all this hell. You get a second chance. A reporter appeared at the park's edge, camera in hand, but Marcus's steady glare sent him retreating. The protection felt natural now, this quiet guardian who'd appeared when her world was crumbling. What about you? Sarah asked. This has changed your life too. Marcus chuckled, a sound with little humor in it. Yeah, well, I never expected to become the poster boy for motorcycle club community service. The club's getting calls from domestic violence organizations, requests for partnerships. It's different. Good different? He considered this. Maybe. We'll see how it plays out. The wind picked up, sending leaves swirling around their feet. Sarah pulled her jacket closer and realized something had shifted inside her over these past few days. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long was still there, but it no longer defined her. In its place, something new was growing, a strength she'd forgotten she possessed. The worst wasn't over yet, but for the first time in years she believed she could survive whatever came next. The courthouse steps felt like ice beneath Sarah's trembling legs as she sat waiting for her turn to testify. 3 days had passed since Marcus's arrest, and the bruises on her throat had deepened to ugly purples and yellows. Each swallow still sent sharp reminders of how close she'd come to never breathing again. Jake stood nearby, his leather jacket replaced with a clean button-down shirt that looked strange on his massive frame. He'd been her shadow since that night, sleeping on her couch despite her protests that Marcus was locked up. Bail hearings happened fast, he'd said simply. Not taking chances. Detective Rivera emerged from the courthouse doors, her expression grim. Sarah, we need to talk before you go in there. They moved to a quiet corner of the lobby, Jake hovering protectively close. Rivera's voice dropped low. Marcus's lawyer is going to try to paint this as a domestic dispute that got out of hand. He's claiming Jake broke into your home and assaulted an innocent man defending his property. Sarah's stomach lurched. But that's not what happened. Marcus was killing me. I know that. You know that. But his lawyer is good, and he's going to twist everything. The fact that Jake has a record doesn't help. Rivera glanced at Jake apologetically. They're going to make this about a violent biker with a criminal past attacking a respectable businessman. Jake's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Sarah felt a surge of protective fury. Marcus is the violent one. I have years of hospital records, police reports, which his lawyer will claim were exaggerated or fabricated to cover up an affair. Rivera held up a hand as Sarah started to protest. I'm not saying it's true. I'm telling you what they'll argue. You need to be prepared. Through the courthouse windows, Sarah could see a small crowd gathering outside. Word had spread through town about the arrest, and opinions were sharply divided. Some saw Jake as a hero who'd saved her life. Others whispered about vigilante justice and bikers taking the law into their own hands. There's something else, Rivera continued. Marcus is claiming Jake threatened him before, that this was premeditated. Says Jake came to his office weeks ago and made threats. Sarah's blood ran cold. She remembered Jake mentioning he'd talked to Marcus, but he'd never told her the details. She looked at him questioningly. I went to warn him, Jake admitted quietly. Told him if he hurt her again, he'd answer to me. Figured maybe he'd back off if he knew someone was watching. Rivera rubbed her temples. That's going to complicate things. His lawyer will use that to support the premeditation angle. The courthouse doors opened again, and Marcus's attorney strode out, a sharp-dressed man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Behind him came Marcus's sister Patricia, her face a mask of righteous indignation. She spotted Sarah and marched over. You should be ashamed of yourself, Patricia hissed. Destroying a good man's reputation with these lies. Marcus told me about your drinking, your instability. Now you've dragged some criminal into it to cover up your own problems. Jake stepped forward, his presence alone enough to make Patricia step back. Ma'am, you might want to keep walking. Don't threaten me, you thug. I know what you people are like. Sarah found her voice, surprising herself with its steadiness. Your brother tried to strangle me, Patricia. Look at my neck. Look at my arms. This isn't the first time, and it wouldn't have been the last. Bruises can come from anywhere. You probably did that to yourself. The callousness of the statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. These people would twist anything, deny everything, to protect their version of the truth. It didn't matter how much evidence existed, they'd find a way to make her the villain. Detective Rivera intervened before Jake could respond. Mrs. Henley, I need to ask you to move along. You're interfering with a witness. Patricia shot Sarah one last venomous look before stalking away. Sarah watched her go, feeling a mix of pity and anger. How many times had Patricia seen the signs? How many excuses had she made for her brother's behavior? Don't let her get to you, Rivera said gently. Families like that, they enable because admitting the truth means acknowledging their own complicity. A bailiff appeared at the courthouse doors. Sarah Chen, you're up. Sarah's legs felt like water as she stood. Jake caught her elbow, steadying her. For a moment, she looked into his eyes and saw something that gave her strength. Not just protection, but belief. He believed in her truth, in her worth, in her right to be safe. You've got this, he said quietly. Just tell them what happened. All of it. Sarah nodded, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the courthouse doors. Behind her, she could hear Jake's heavy footsteps following. Whatever happened in that courtroom, whatever lies Marcus's lawyer told, she wouldn't face it alone. The truth was worth fighting for, even if the fight seemed impossible. The courthouse steps felt like they stretched on forever as Sarah climbed them, her legs trembling with each step. Marcus walked beside her, his presence steady and reassuring, despite the formal suit that looked strange on his massive frame. The leather jacket was gone, replaced by dark navy that couldn't quite hide the tattoos creeping up his neck, but his eyes held the same fierce determination that had saved her life. You don't have to look at him, Marcus murmured as they reached the heavy wooden doors. Keep your eyes on the prosecutor. on the judge, on me if you need to. But you don't owe him even a glance." Sarah nodded, her throat too tight to speak. 6 months of preparation, of therapy sessions and legal meetings had led to this moment. Detective Rodriguez met them in the hallway, her smile warm but professional. "He took a plea deal this morning," she said without preamble. 25 years, no possibility of parole for 15. Sarah's knees buckled, and Marcus caught her elbow. "What does that mean?" "It means you won," Rodriguez said gently. "No trial, no having to testify. He's going away for a very long time." The relief hit Sarah like a physical blow, tears streaming down her face as months of held breath finally escaped her lungs. Marcus pulled her into his arms, right there in the courthouse hallway, his voice rough against her ear. "It's over, sweetheart. It's really over." But even as he held her, Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. The plea deal meant something else too. It meant the full story wouldn't come out in court. The details of what Marcus had done that night, the line he'd crossed to save her, would remain buried in sealed files and whispered rumors. The ride back to town was quiet, both of them lost in thought. The diner had reopened 3 months ago with new management, and Sarah had been offered her old job back. She'd declined. Some chapters needed to close completely before new ones could begin. "I've been thinking," she said, as they pulled into the parking lot of the small apartment complex where she now lived. It wasn't much, but it was hers, the first place that had ever truly belonged to her alone. Marcus shut off the engine and turned to face her. "About what?" "About moving. Really moving this time. Somewhere new, where nobody knows our story." She watched his expression carefully. Both of us. Something flickered in his dark eyes. Hope, maybe. Or fear. "Sarah, you don't owe me anything. What I did, what you did, saved my life." She reached across the console and took his scarred hand in both of hers. "And what we've built since then. Marcus, I love you. Not because you saved me, but because of who you are when you think nobody's watching. The way you helped Mrs. Chen with her groceries. How you fixed Tommy's bike when his mom couldn't afford to. The way you read to me when the nightmares get bad." His thumb traced across her knuckles, gentle despite the calluses. "The club won't just let me walk away. There are consequences." "I know." And she did. The past months had taught her that freedom always came with a price. But we could try. We could start over somewhere nobody knows us as the biker and the waitress, the protector and the victim. We could just be Marcus and Sarah. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Finally, Marcus lifted their joined hands and pressed his lips to her fingers. "Where would we go?" "I don't know. Somewhere with mountains, maybe. Or the ocean. Somewhere clean." She smiled through fresh tears. "Somewhere we could both breathe." That evening, they sat on her small balcony sharing Chinese takeout and planning their escape. Marcus had savings, more than she'd expected from someone who'd lived his whole life on the edges of society. Sarah had been carefully setting aside money from her new job at the library, a quiet position that suited her need for peace. "We'd have to leave quietly," Marcus said, spooning lo mein onto her plate. "No goodbyes, no forwarding address. At least not at first." "I know." The thought of leaving behind the few friends she'd made was painful, but not as painful as the thought of staying trapped by their past. "When?" "Soon. Before anyone notices the pattern of me pulling back from club business." As if summoned by their conversation, the rumble of motorcycles echoed from the street below. Marcus tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun Sarah knew he still carried. But the bikes passed by without slowing, their sound fading into the evening air. Marcus relaxed, but Sarah could see the reminder had shaken him. Time was running out for them to choose their own ending. 2 weeks, she said suddenly. "Let's give ourselves 2 weeks to wrap up everything here, and then we go." Marcus met her eyes, and in them she saw her own desperate hope reflected back. 2 weeks, he agreed. The courthouse steps were slick with morning rain as Sarah clutched the manila envelope containing the divorce papers. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus's arrest, and the bruises on her face had faded to yellow shadows, but the tremor in her hands remained. Detective Rodriguez had called that morning with news that Marcus had been denied bail after violating his restraining order twice from jail. Harassing phone calls made through other inmates. Jake's Harley rumbled to life in the parking lot behind her. He'd insisted on driving her to every court appearance, every meeting with her lawyer, every small step toward freedom. The other bikers had formed an unofficial rotation, ensuring someone was always watching her apartment building, her workplace, anywhere Marcus might try to find her. "You ready for this?" Jake asked, removing his helmet as he approached. The angry red scar across his knuckles from their confrontation with Marcus had healed into a permanent reminder of that night. Sarah nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. Today's hearing would determine if the restraining order would be made permanent, and Marcus's lawyer had been fighting it aggressively. "What if the judge doesn't believe me? What if Marcus gets out? Then we deal with it," Jake said simply. "But you've got a whole community backing you now. That changes everything." Inside the courthouse, Sarah was surprised to see familiar faces filling the gallery. Rosa from the diner sat in the front row, having closed the restaurant for the morning to be there. Several of Jake's club members occupied an entire bench, their leather jackets replaced with clean button-down shirts, out of respect for the court. Even Mrs. Chen from the laundromat had come, holding a small sign that read, "We stand with Sarah." Marcus entered in shackles, his once imposing frame diminished by the orange jumpsuit. His eyes found Sarah immediately, and she felt the familiar chill of fear before Jake's presence beside her steadied her resolve. This time, she didn't look away. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Mills, had built a compelling case. Phone records showed Marcus's escalating threats. Hospital records documented Sarah's injuries over the past 2 years. Security footage from the diner captured his violent outburst the night everything changed. When Sarah took the stand, her voice was quiet but unwavering. She detailed years of escalating abuse, the isolation Marcus had imposed, the terror that had consumed her daily life. When the defense attorney tried to paint her as vindictive, suggesting she was fabricating claims for a better divorce settlement, Jake watched her spine straighten with newfound strength. "My husband tried to kill me," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. "If Jake Miller and his friends hadn't intervened that night, I wouldn't be here to testify. I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for the right to live without fear." The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal, but Sarah held firm. When he suggested she could have left Marcus any time she wanted, she looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, when someone controls every aspect of your life, when they've convinced you that you're worthless and that no one would believe you or help you, leaving isn't as simple as walking out the door. I tried once before. The bruises from that attempt put me in the hospital for a week." Jake's testimony was equally powerful. He described finding Sarah that night, broken and desperate, and the immediate recognition that she was in genuine danger. When asked why he'd gotten involved instead of simply calling police, his answer surprised everyone. "I've seen what unchecked violence does to communities," he said. "My club has a reputation, and not all of it's good. But sometimes that reputation can be used to protect instead of intimidate. Sarah needed protection that night, and we had the ability to provide it." The prosecutor introduced character witnesses who painted a picture of the man Jake had become. The literacy program he'd started for underprivileged kids, the charity rides organized by his club, the small acts of community service that rarely made headlines. During a brief recess, Marcus's mother approached Sarah in the hallway. The older woman's face was etched with shame and sorrow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I knew he had problems with anger, but I never imagined. I should have said something years ago." Sarah's lawyer had warned her not to speak to Marcus's family, but something in the woman's eyes moved her. "He needs help," Sarah said gently. "Real help, but I can't be the one to save him anymore." When court reconvened, Judge Harrison's decision was swift and decisive. The restraining order would be permanent. Marcus would serve 18 months for assault and violation of the temporary order, followed by mandatory anger management and psychiatric evaluation. As the gavel fell, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine relief. The weight that had pressed on her chest for so long finally began to lift. Behind her, the gallery erupted in quiet celebration, and she turned to see Jake's rare smile. Outside the courthouse, as news crews gathered to document the unusual alliance between the biker and the waitress, Sarah realized her new life was truly beginning. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as Maya took the witness stand for the second day. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice came out clear and steady. The purple bruises on her throat had faded to yellow, but the photographs from that night were projected on the screen for everyone to see. "Mrs. Chen, can you tell us what happened after your husband discovered you had spoken to the police?" District Attorney Morrison asked gently. Maya's eyes found Jake in the gallery. He sat in the front row, his leather jacket replaced by a simple black button-down shirt, his usually wild hair pulled back neatly. He nodded encouragingly. "He came home around midnight," Maya began. "He was drunk, angrier than I'd ever seen him. He said the neighbors had been talking, that someone had seen police cars. He demanded to know what I'd told them. And what did you tell him? The truth, that I'd reported the abuse, that I was done being afraid." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. David sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of controlled fury. Even in his expensive suit, Maya could see the violence simmering beneath the surface. What was his response? Maya took a shaky breath. "He said he was going to kill me, that if he couldn't have me, no one could. He grabbed me by the throat and started squeezing. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die." Jake's jaw clenched as he watched David's lawyer frantically scribbling notes, no doubt preparing to paint Maya as an unreliable witness, a woman scorned, seeking revenge. "How did you escape?" "I didn't. I passed out. When I woke up, David was tying my hands with electrical cord. He was muttering about making it look like a suicide, about how sorry everyone would be when they found my body." The prosecutor nodded gravely. "What happened next?" "I heard motorcycles outside. David heard them too. He went to the window and started cursing. Then the doorbell rang, and someone was pounding on the door." "Did you recognize the voice?" "Yes. It was Jake Reeves. He was shouting for David to open the door, that he knew what was happening." Maya's voice grew stronger as she continued. "David grabbed a kitchen knife and cut the cords on my hands. He told me to get rid of Jake, or he'd kill us both. I stumbled to the door, and when I opened it, Jake took one look at me and knew. What did Mr. Reeves do?" "He pushed past me into the house. David was waiting with the knife. They fought, and David tried to stab him, but Jake was faster, stronger. He disarmed David and held him down until the police arrived." The defense attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit, rose for cross-examination. "Mrs. Chen, isn't it true that you and Mr. Reeves had been having an affair?" "No, that's not true." "Come now, Mrs. Chen. A married woman doesn't typically seek protection from strange men unless there's an ulterior motive." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Jake's presence steadied her. "I was desperate. My husband had been beating me for months. Jake was the first person who listened, who believed me. How convenient that this biker with a criminal record happened to be your knight in shining armor." "Objection!" Morrison called out. Argumentative, sustained. The defense attorney switched tactics. Mrs. Chen, you've testified that you were unconscious when Mr. Reeves arrived. How can you be certain about the sequence of events? I saw David with the knife. I saw him attack Jake. The police found the electrical cord, the knife, everything exactly as I described, or exactly as you and Mr. Reeves planned it. Maya's temper flared. David tried to murder me. If Jake hadn't come when he did, I'd be dead. You can twist it however you want, but that's the truth. The attorney smiled coldly. No further questions. During the lunch recess, Maya found Jake waiting in the hallway. The courthouse corridors were less crowded now, most of the spectators having left to grab food. You did great in there, he said quietly. She made it sound like we planned this whole thing. Juries aren't stupid, Maya. They can see who's telling the truth. Maya looked up at him, this unlikely protector who had changed her life so completely. What happens after this is over? After David is convicted? Jake was quiet for a long moment. You build a new life. You become the person you were meant to be before he tried to destroy you. And us? He touched her hand gently. We figure it out as we go. No pressure, no expectations, just two people who've been through hell together. As they walked back toward the courtroom, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Whatever the jury decided, whatever came next, she was no longer the terrified woman who had begged for help in a diner parking lot. She was a survivor, and she was finally free. The courthouse steps were slick with morning rain as Sarah clutched the manila envelope containing the restraining order. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus had made his promise, and true to his word, he hadn't left her side during any of the legal proceedings. The massive biker stood beside her now, his leather jacket dark with moisture, scanning the crowd with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to spot trouble before it found him. "He's here," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of rain pattering against the concrete. Marcus followed her gaze to see Derek emerging from a black sedan across the street. Even from a distance, the fury radiating from Sarah's husband was palpable. His expensive suit was immaculate, his posture rigid with barely contained rage. Behind him walked his lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in designer heels who looked like she could cut glass with her stare. "Remember what we talked about," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady and reassuring. "You don't engage. You don't respond. You let the system do its job." Sarah nodded, though her hands trembled as she watched Derek approach the courthouse entrance. She'd filed for divorce 2 days after obtaining the restraining order, and today was the emergency hearing to determine temporary custody of their assets and establish protection measures. Her own lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Janet Chen, whom Marcus had somehow convinced to take the case pro bono, had warned her that Derek would likely be at his most dangerous when he realized he was losing control. Inside the courthouse, the familiar smell of old wood and industrial disinfectant filled Sarah's nostrils. Marcus couldn't accompany her into the courtroom. His criminal record prevented that, but he positioned himself just outside the doors where she could see him through the small windows. The sight of his reassuring presence gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Derek's lawyer immediately went on the offensive, painting Sarah as an unstable woman who'd fallen under the influence of a dangerous criminal element. She spoke eloquently about Derek's standing in the community, his charitable contributions, his unblemished reputation. But when Janet Chen presented the photographs of Sarah's injuries, the medical records, and the sworn statements from witnesses at the diner, the judge's expression grew increasingly grim. "Your Honor," Derek's lawyer continued, "my client has never been charged with any crime. These allegations are nothing more than the desperate fabrications of a woman seeking to maximize her divorce settlement." Sarah felt her chest tighten as Derek leaned forward in his chair, that familiar predatory smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Even here, surrounded by the trappings of justice, he radiated the confidence of a man who'd never truly faced consequences for his actions. But then Janet Chen stood to present their evidence, and Sarah watched Derek's expression change. The smile faltered as crime scene photos appeared on the courtroom's display screen. Images of their home after Derek's last violent rampage. Broken furniture, holes punched in walls, Sarah's blood on the kitchen tiles. The prosecutor had shared these with them as part of the ongoing criminal investigation. "Your Honor," Janet said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade, "Mr. Morrison may not have been charged yet, but that's about to change. The district attorney's office has informed us that an arrest warrant will be issued later today." The color drained from Derek's face. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Sarah could see the panic building in his eyes. This wasn't how he'd expected things to go. In his world, money and reputation were supposed to be enough to make problems disappear. Judge Morrison, no relation to Derek despite the shared surname, reviewed the evidence with meticulous care. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Mr. Morrison, the evidence presented today paints a disturbing picture of systematic abuse and intimidation. The restraining order will remain in effect indefinitely. Mrs. Morrison will retain exclusive use of the marital home, and you are forbidden from coming within 500 feet of her residence, workplace, or any location where she might reasonably be expected to be present." Derek shot to his feet, his composure finally cracking. "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" "Sit down, Mr. Morrison," the judge commanded, her gaze steely. "Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and prosecution to the fullest extent of the law." As they filed out of the courtroom, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope that her nightmare might actually be ending. Through the window, she could see Marcus waiting exactly where he'd promised to be, his presence a reminder that she was no longer facing this battle alone. But as they reached the courthouse doors, Sarah noticed Derek had separated from his lawyer and was approaching them with quick, determined steps. His face was flushed with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. "Sarah!" he called out, his voice echoing through the marble hallway. "We need to talk. Now." Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and her husband, and Sarah realized that despite everything they'd accomplished today, the most dangerous moment might still be ahead of them. The courthouse steps gleamed in the morning sun as Sarah adjusted her navy dress for the third time. 6 months had passed since that night at the diner, but the memory remained vivid. Rick's terrified face as Marcus stood between them, the sound of sirens, the weight of finally being free. Marcus emerged from the courthouse doors, straightening his tie with obvious discomfort. The sight of him in a pressed suit still made Sarah smile. The leather jacket and boots had been replaced by something her lawyer had deemed jury-friendly, though the tattoos peeking above his collar told their own story. "How'd it go in there?" Sarah asked, falling into step beside him. "Judge accepted the plea deal. Rick gets 8 years, no parole for 4. Marcus's voice carried a satisfaction he didn't try to hide. "Assault, domestic violence, violation of restraining order. Your testimony sealed it." Sarah nodded, feeling a complex mix of relief and sadness. The man she'd once loved enough to marry would spend the next several years behind bars. But the bruises had healed, and for the first time in years she could sleep through the night without checking the locks twice. "Marcus!" She touched his arm as they reached the sidewalk. "I need to tell you something." He stopped, those intense dark eyes focusing on her with the same protective attention she'd grown to cherish. "What is it?" "I'm leaving town next week." The words hung between them like a challenge. Marcus's expression didn't change, but Sarah had learned to read the subtle shifts in his demeanor. The slight tightening around his eyes, the way his shoulders squared. He was preparing for impact. "My sister in Oregon," Sarah continued quickly. "She's offered me a job managing her bookstore. It's a chance to start over completely. New place, new people who don't know my story." "That's good," Marcus said, though his voice had gone carefully neutral. You deserve that. A fresh start. They walked in silence toward the diner where it had all begun. Betty had insisted on throwing what she called a victory lunch, though Sarah suspected it was really an excuse to fuss over them both one more time. "What about you?" Sarah asked. "What happens next for Marcus Webb, unlikely hero?" He snorted. "Hero, right." But there was less edge to his self-deprecation than there used to be. "Club's talking about making me road captain. Apparently, my newfound respect for the legal system is viewed as an asset. And the community service? Finishing up next month. Been helping at the youth center teaching kids motorcycle maintenance." He paused, a genuine smile breaking through. "Turns out some of those angry teenagers just need someone who speaks their language." The diner came into view, its familiar neon sign flickering even in daylight. Through the windows, Sarah could see Betty bustling around, preparing for their arrival. "Marcus!" Sarah stopped walking. "That night, when I asked for your help, why did you say yes?" "Really?" He was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Because I saw myself in you. Not the victim part," he added quickly, "but the trapped part. The feeling like you're stuck playing a role that doesn't fit anymore." He met her eyes. "I'd been that angry biker for so long, I forgot I could be anything else. Helping you reminded me that we get to choose who we become." Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I'm going to miss you." "Yeah, well," Marcus cleared his throat. "Oregon's not that far, and I've got a perfectly good motorcycle. You'd visit? Try and stop me." The simple promise carried more weight than flowery declarations ever could. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. "What's this?" Marcus asked, accepting it with obvious suspicion. "Open it." Inside was a silver keychain, a small angel with outstretched wings. "I know it's cheesy," Sarah said quickly, "but I wanted you to have something to remind you that sometimes we're all exactly who we need to be at exactly the right moment." Marcus stared at the keychain for a long moment, then carefully attached it to his keys. "Hell's Angels with an actual angel," he mused. "The guys are going to love this. Let them talk." "Oh, I intend to." Betty appeared in the diner doorway, waving them inside with theatrical impatience. "Get in here, you two! The pie's getting cold!" As they walked toward the diner together, Sarah realized this wasn't really an ending. It was a beginning, for both of them. She was heading toward a new life she'd never dared imagine, and Marcus was discovering he could be a protector without being a predator. Sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places, wearing leather and riding a Harley. Sometimes courage looked like a terrified woman finally asking for help. And sometimes, Sarah thought as Marcus held the diner door open for her, the most extraordinary acts of all were simply about one human being choosing to see another's worth.